Okay, I got big news for you people. If you're an alcoholic like me, I want you to know that the alcoholism is not your fault. What are you talking about? Of course it's your fault. You're the one who picks up the bottle. You're the one who has all the toxic thoughts and toxic emotions. And you're the one that eventually needs to get rid of the stress. And you've got to pick up that bottle. So it's you doing all the actions and the behaviors, right? Okay, well, that is one perspective, and that is the perspective that I used to live by, and that is why I was always stuck in the midst of a deep, dark, alcoholic state that I couldn't get out of, a cycle that went on for 8 years in and out of institutions and detoxes and rehabs and meetings, and it was taking me out. But then I switched to a different perspective. And I'm going to show you that it's not you that's forcing you to drink, but rather it is a separate, primal, primitive, reactive brain inside of your head that's forcing it upon you. But that's a part of you, right? Because it's inside your head. I'm going to show you that from a different perspective, it doesn't have to be. And from this new perspective, you can figure out how to overcome it altogether. This guy, this little red guy right here, he represents the instinctual core, this primitive reactive brain. And when we look at ourselves from a different perspective, the IC perspective, it becomes a separate entity. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, first of all, we all take on this default perspective, right? When we start to form our consciousness, right? When we start to become aware, it's just natural to think that all the emotions and all the thoughts that are going inside our head are our own because they're inside our head. Of course they are. And that's what I used to always think. And I would have these two conflicting, screaming things. One side of me knowing that I would never have a drink again. And the other side screaming, drink, drink, drink. You're a piece of crap. You're no good. You can't handle this. This world is scary. And eventually, over time, because all the thoughts and emotions were my own, it would always win. That secondary voice would always take over. Eventually, I'd have to give in because it would get louder and louder and louder and louder until, and I tried everything out there to stop. And eventually, I came upon the beginning notions of the IC solution. The IC is looking at yourself from a different perspective, where the IC is the instinctual core. This guy down here. And the instinctual, let me give you a quick overview of the characters here. This is you, which involves your consciousness and your conscious brain. The one being your consciousness, yourself, and the conscious brain, the only thing you have control over. Then we have this vast subconscious, a thing basically that's running the show 90% of the time. And then we have the instinctual core, this primitive reactive part of your brain that has a separate agenda. Now, this separate agenda is specifically made to help keep you alive. But it wasn't made for this world. It was made for a world of 30,000 years ago, a prehistoric world of the caveman. It doesn't know how to change or adapt to a different world that it lives in today, a much more fantastic world. But instead, it is still always looking for fires. It is looking for threats. And in today's world, it finds so many threats and so many treats that are all bullshit that won't help us survive at all. So I'm going to show you how that went down in me using what I call the the Instinctual Core User's Guide, so we can break down basically any scenario of what's going on inside of our head. And here I've kind of outlined and framed just what's going on when I had the perspective that all the thoughts and the emotions were my own within this frame here. And I had this just unknown fear, anger, hate, sadness, all sorts of stress and cravings and these demands that weren't coming from me, like get a drink, and the judgments that weren't coming from me, like you're a piece of crap. All of this was going on inside of my head until eventually I had to break down to go to the only escape I knew, which was alcohol, to get the pleasure and to get all this to shut up. And alcohol is what they call the coping mechanisms. But once I took on the IC perspective, So basically, things would go like this. It would go "Brr," louder and louder and louder, stress, fear, anger, hate, 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 until I eventually had to shut it up. Alcohol would drop me back down. It would make me feel, it would get rid of that all. Okay. That's what life was like with the default perspective, where I was all the thoughts, where I was all the emotions, all of that toxicity. And I had to move to the only behavior I knew to shut it up. Now, let's move on to the IC perspective, where we have this instinctual core. And this instinctual core is a completely separate intelligence that just happens to exist inside our head. When you take this on, it may sound a little ridiculous, right? Because all these thoughts and emotions should be your own. But it is neither wrong nor right to take on this perspective. It is just a perspective. But it can be so powerful when you do, and it was so powerful for me because I started to see why the instinctual core was doing things. You see, in a world of 30,000 years ago, why it would light things up so much for me. And that's because in a world of 30,000 years ago, in this primitive world, it was constantly it was keeping us alive by constantly being on the alert for immediate threats to our survival. Things like the saber-toothed tiger that would jump out of nowhere, right? But it's working on a whole bunch of different layers. And today's layer, it is adapted to, since it always wants to continue to look for threats, it's adapted to the fact that we no longer have all the immediate threats that will get us killed within the next, instantaneously to within the next week. So instead, it moves on to threats that may very loosely get us killed sometime within the next couple of years. Like the example I'm going to use today is like losing your job. Like, so it keeps you, when it doesn't have the actual immediate threats, it says, okay, your job is the immediate threat. If you lose your job, and I'm talking, if I lose my job, but don't worry, it was lighting me up on all sorts of layers, right? But I'm not going to talk about them all today. I'm just going to talk about work stress. If I lose my job, then that is equivalent to death. Of course, it's not. And of course, fear and anger. Okay, well, what is it trying to do? If I lose my job, it's equivalent to death. So it wants me to destroy any threats to losing my job. It wants me to avoid any threats to lose my job, and it wants me to attain that paycheck at the end of the day, so that I can continue to live. But you see, living through this method, it starts to try to control you with fear and anger and the fight or flight reaction, where you're not productive. I wasn't productive at all. I worked at a very low efficiency, and eventually it would say, come on, you're no good, work harder, demands, judgments, you're no good, demands, work harder, fear, anger, the fight or flight system, hate if someone got in your way, sadness if you didn't get it done. And the thing is, because your job is never truly secure, you've got to outcompete the neighbors at the instinctual core. And you've got to outdo all the other salespeople. You got to outsell the other companies. You got to do blah 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 blah. It would always keep me maxed out. But then the instinctual core it needs a victory, but there was no victory at work because it was an ongoing thing. All the fires would still be there the next day. But I see as something called reward confusion. It keeps you kept up in this cycle of stress, of work stress, and it needs a victory. Where can it find a victory if it can't find it on the safety layer? Oh, well, guess what? The victory of alcohol, where it just basically shortcuts your system, when all of a sudden you have overcome the threats, you've avoided the threats, and you've attained the treat. It's a lie, but it's a short circuiting of the system. It actually believes that you've just achieved everything it wanted to by consuming the alcohol. So it is how I lived. It is how I lived for the longest time. I worked because I was being forced to by the instinctual core, and I worked to get that pleasure. where the instinctual core would finally say, okay, you can release all that stuff. Now, go get the alcohol. I mean, you know, that song, Everybody's Working for the Weekend. I'm not going to say, okay. Everybody's working for the weekend. I did sing it. It's beautiful, wasn't it? That's where I was. And because I was just waiting to get that alcohol because it constantly, the instinctual core constantly had me ramped up and eventually got that alcohol and it all went away. Alcohol wasn't a problem. Alcohol was the solution. Alcohol was when the the instinctual core thought that I had attained the treat, thought I had defeated the threats, and thought I had avoided all the threats. It was all a big lie. I was hijacked, completely and utterly hijacked. But then it started to dawn on me that it was all bullshit. All the lies that it had built up in my subconscious were bullshit. And I started to learn to live in a different world, a world where I pass things through the human side. I started to let all the nonsense, all this stuff, pass through me. So it no longer, the instinctual core no longer had a hold of me. I would see the fear, I would see the anger, I would see the judgments, I would see them as lies, and I would let them just go right through. It's like once you realize the instinctual core can be looked at as a separate entity inside of you, you can start to treat it like a little puppy that's trying to jump up on that bed, barking louder and louder. And it was barking, go get a drink. You're a piece of crap. Go get a drink. Go get a drink. Go get a drink. Go get a drink. Until finally, when I realized it wasn't me. And all the yelling it would do, I could just laugh. I could just look at it and say, sorry, buddy, it's not actually helping us survive. Pat it on the head, let it go through, realizing that all of it wasn't me at all. And as soon as I started to do that, it started to get quieter and quieter. When I took on this new perspective within a couple weeks, this nagging thing that went on for decades was gone. It was amazing. And I made so many changes since then. But then still, I had to get into work and do things, right? Because before, the instinctual core was forcing me to do the work, right? And then forcing me to get the alcohol as the solution because I couldn't get the solution done. But when I started to live in this new world, I found a new way to do the work, to do whatever it was I wanted to do, to live in a world by my human happiness drives, where I could go into any cumbersome task and just start to look at it through a different perspective. How can I make this intriguing? How can I solve this puzzle? How can I learn to appreciate what I have and what I'm doing? How can I learn to engage fully focused? And how can I work into a world where I can improve upon myself and I can improve upon the world? When I started to work in these areas, and instead of working for the three necessary internal reactions that the instinctual core was going for to destroy the threat, immediate survival threat, to avoid the immediate survival threat, or to attain the immediate survival threat, I started to live in a world of the human external reactions where I was doing things because I wanted to do, and a wide variety of things that existed. So, jumping back to this baby here, while I was living here, I moved to here, and that brought me, and in this case, let's call this lovely person here, Casey, to the same point that where I was, where she would see the IC as the one that was trying to force her to drink. The alcoholism was not her fault. It was an untrained instinctual core. And every time it raised up and tried to get her to drink, she would pat it on the head and say, you're not jumping on the bed tonight. And eventually it would get quieter and quieter. And this depiction is pretty funny because the instinctual core is sad. The instinctual core is neither sad nor happy. It sends sadness, it sends pleasure, but it doesn't care. It's just trying to get a job done. And when you retrain it and you tell it, no, we're not going to get that drink, that is not an actual victory, you take back control of your life and you can find happiness where you didn't know existed. Before, I was always working for immediate gratification, which had nothing to do with happiness. Now I live in a world where I work and I play. And that is where happiness exists. in the action. And gratification is still sent by the instinctual core because the instinctual core is seeing that I've found a different way to live life rather than a world of fear and anger, fight or flight, and anxiety and depression. I live in a world where happiness can be found in any action in any day. In closing, I just wanted to say that I developed the IC solution in a complete state of desperation. I tried everything out there to quit drinking, and I was on a downward spiral with the finish line of death until I found the first inklings of the IC solution. And I've developed it for many years to help it have the same result to so many people out there that are suffering. Please help me reach as many people as I can by liking and subscribing to this video. And if you're ready to start making changes for yourself, please come visit us at the Instinct Center and start to try out the separation from your instinctual core and join us in the IC investigation meetups and start your own overriding decisions of your own. I can't wait to have you. It's all for free for the time being, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you. See you soon.